It's not just storytelling, it's Hawaii's voice for Hawaii's people. PBS Hawaii Home is here.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaii are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo, and by Carl Smith Ball, providing legal services throughout Hawaii and the Pacific since 1857, making a positive difference in the communities where we live and work. Should cell phones stay or go in schools? 15 states and 7 of the largest school districts in the U.S. have banned or restricted their use. Educators have said that cell phones are a major distraction, cause social friction, and even contribute to behavioral and mental health challenges. But cell phones can also be lifesavers in an emergency. What should local schools do? Join the discussion next on Insights.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Yanji Denise. Smartphones have changed how we access information, how we learn, and how we socialize. Today's high school and middle school students have essentially lived their entire lives with smartphones around. While those devices provide instant connectivity and access to information, educators have voiced concerns about their use in schools. Cell phones can be a major distraction and can contribute to social problems and behavioral and mental health issues. So should Hawaii look to enforce stricter regulations for cell phones in schools, as many other states have now done? We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email or call in your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and on the PBS Hawaii YouTube page. Now to our guests. Britt Young is a licensed marriage and family therapist and founder and director of Explore Counseling. Originally from Georgia, she received her MA in marriage and family therapy from Argosy University in Honolulu. Dr. Timothy Cottrell has been the head of Iolani School in Honolulu since 2012. He graduated from Syracuse University and has an MA and PhD from Princeton. Prior to working at Iolani, he was the head of school for the Harley School in Rochester, New York. Dr. Reed Kuba is the principal at William P. Jarrett Middle School in Palolo Valley here in Honolulu. He's been an educator for 30 years, including the last 17 in East Honolulu. He was named the 2021 Hawaii Principal of the Year. And Alea Tuitele is a sophomore at James Campbell High School in Ewa Beach on Oahu. She was the co-captain of the OIA West Champions JV volleyball team this season. She enjoys photography and traveling. We're so happy to have all of you here tonight. Thank you for being here. We know that Hawaii has sort of a hodgepodge when it comes to policies. DOE does not have specific set guidelines. It's really principal specific. So Dr. Kuba, Principal Kuba, I want to start with you. What has your school decided on?
So we have a full ban during the school day. So as soon as students come onto our campus, they know they should be putting their phones away, and it doesn't come out till after school. So it's for the full day. And we've been having it for quite some time, so the kids know, and it's helped us a lot. I think seeing more socialization during recess, of course not having issues within the classroom, it's been a good thing for our school.
Not all middle schools have that policy. What inspired you to make that change?
I just think, when I see them, or kids, sometimes I'd see them walking together and they both had their cell phones out. And I joke with them, I tell them, I hope you're not texting each other, but you should be talking to each other instead. So just getting the kids, I think, going back to that, talking with each other, enjoying each other, that's what we want to try and get for our middle schoolers or even our kids. And it's been helpful, and we see them playing at recess and enjoying their company rather than heads in the phone or heads in technology. So.
Dr. Cottrell, I know that Iolani School made some changes this year to the cell phone policy. Tell us, what are the changes and what inspired them?
So for a number of years, we'd had a ban in our lower schools, so K through 6. This year, we extended that to 7th through 9th grade. That was influenced nationally. There was a book that came out this year by the author Jonathan Haidt called Anxious Generation, and it really elevated the conversation on the rise in mental health issues for teenagers. The book makes a correlation between cell phone use, social media, and that. That didn't drive our decision, right? What drove our decision was another part of the book that talked about opportunity cost. So it's exactly what we just heard, that if you're on your phone all the time, you're missing out on other things. And I think the best indicator there was when students went through the pandemic and they were alone, they had their phones, they had their computers, they were connected that way, but that was a real rise in mental health issues for kids. So same thing, we want our kids to be talking to each other, playing with each other, doing a lot of things like that that are just more good old-fashioned human connection.
And how was that received by parents and students, that adaptation?
Uniformly, really well. There was a little bit at the beginning, but now it's just, I can say outside of my office, it's almost like a riot at lunchtime. The kids are doing so many things together. Yeah.
That's good to hear. Alea, what are the policies at your school?
Well, for my school, we don't really have a policy on phones. Like, we're allowed to use it whenever, wherever, but depending on the class you're in, the teacher really decides if you can use it during class or not.
And what kind of ways does it actually help with learning, and what ways do you think it maybe doesn't?
I think it really helps with most of my learning because I'm in creative media, and it helps save time because getting computers on its own takes us hours sometimes because we have to log into stuff, get more websites, but since we have our phones, it's just like a touch away.
Interesting. Brett, what does the research say when it comes to cell phones in the classroom specifically?
Oh boy, that's a tough one because it depends on who you talk to, but all of this is pretty new. The cell phone bans in several of the states really just happened, so I think the data is really small and constricted right now. What we imagine we will see is an increase in kids learning these social skills that, you learn in that 5 minutes. So you leave class, you leave biology, and you've got 5 minutes to get to your other class. You have a couple choices. You can be on your phone checking to see like what texts you got, or you can be establishing rapport with somebody on the way to class, right? And when I talk to you, for example, 1,000 things are happening in my brain. I'm looking at your eyes. What is she thinking? What is her arm doing? What is her head doing? You're nodding, right? So I'm learning all of these amazing social skills and connectivity skills just by being in your presence. And we believe, at least in the mental health community, that the ability to connect and understand these social cues is armor for life. It's protective from so many mental health issues.
Interesting. We love the viewer questions, and they're already coming in, so thanks to those of you who are writing in. Mark from Manoa has a question for Principal Kuba. Says, I'm an alumni from the 70s. We didn't have cell phones, and if there was an emergency, I'm sure they can go to the office. I'm interested to know what kind of response you get from parents, because there could be some parents who feel like, I need to be able to reach my child at all times. Unfortunately, we live in an age of school violence. We see a lot of it on the continent, not necessarily here in Hawaii, but that is an ever-present danger. So I wonder how parents feel, about you taking away this access.
So we haven't had pushback either on, and especially over the years. So I don't get any at this time. But we also consider that emergency situation is a concern for us too. So on a regular day-to-day, parents know they can call the office and we'll take care of anything, whether it's finding their child, relaying the information. But on an emergency situation, we've had conversations with our leadership on what to do with the cell phone, because we don't take the cell phone from the student. We actually have the student. It's an honor system. They put it away in their bag or their pockets. So in that sense, they're pretty good. But we've talked about, what if we had to lock down? What are we going to do with the cell phones? And so we're still in those conversations. But for me as a principal, I lean towards allowing the students to communicate. I mean, especially in severe situations, I would hate to be the one to say, no, don't call your parent or don't communicate with them in a dire situation. But we're still in those conversations on trying to figure out what's the best to do in an extreme emergency. So I don't have the quick answer for that one.
I think they still have them in their bags to some degree, so should a horrible situation erupt, they would have access to their phones?
They would have access,
Yeah. Dr. Petrell, how do you deal with enforcement? There's a question here from a parent who says, I like the schools that use the locked pouches during school hours. Is that something that's feasible for Hawaii schools? You let the kids keep it on their backpack, keep it on their person. Would you, some schools lock it in a locker or don't allow it on campus at all? What are your thoughts?
There's a really popular container called a Yonder bag. And so, and I know a lot of schools who do use this. Students come to school, they have their own bag, they put it in the Yonder bag, and then it locks. And at the end of the day, they swipe it over kind of a magnetic panel, and it unlocks and they get their phone back out. We talked about that a lot and thought, just like what we just heard, I think it's a better message to say, we trust you, we want you to be responsible, leave it in your backpack, right? And now it's up to you. So, doing that, then there are consequences. So if a student, takes their phone out, they can be asked to go see the dean of students and get detention and things like that. But very little of that, right? I think it's always better to give young people responsibility and then let them learn and let them show that they can do that.
And were there parents who were anxious about being able to reach their kids during the day?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So we also have policies for students who have medical needs, right? So they can still keep their phones. Again, that's another issue of having the phones in the backpack. So in the event of an emergency, we just put out the message that before phones, this was something we knew how to do really well. It wasn't as if we didn't know how to get a hold of parents, and we still have that capacity. So we still do that. Anytime we need to get a hold of a parent, we know to. But
Alea, what are your thoughts? I'm curious to know how much of the time that you interact with your phone on campus is for learning and how much of it is for socializing. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but what does that mix look like?
I think I use my phone a lot during my free time, like at lunch, even though that's probably not a good thing. But I use it just like to find my friends or whatever. I'm not texting on it all the time. But during class, I'll use it for like 15 minutes-ish if my teachers require that we need to go online for something, or if I need to check my grades for anything.
Yeah. Britt, I'm interested in this idea of distraction, because I know this with myself, that when I sit down, I try to read books, right? I was a poli-sci undergrad, so I'm experienced at reading a lot. But I do find that I really have to force myself not to say, well, let me look up that fact and let me explore that and then get lost in my phone. So what is this distraction? How distracting is this device, and how is that impacting students in particular?
It's so interesting. I was just listening to a podcast this morning about attention span and has it gone down? And it's interesting, the jury's still out. Like, is it that we have less capacity for concentrating, or is there just so much stuff it looks that way? And I think the data was something along the lines of even like scenes in a movie are now 3 seconds long, where they used to be 6 seconds long. So we've been sort of adapting and habituating to shorter things and shorter attention span, shorter reasons to focus. And so I imagine that's part of what you're asking as far as like, is it there, and do we have the ability at the age of 14 to 18 to know it's there, and then maybe even a light comes on that there's a text and like stay with the teacher? I say probably not. We're creatures of habit, and so when it dings or when we see something flash up, it's like a robot. We just go there. So I love the idea of it being accessible, but not, right here, because I don't think the human brain at the age of adolescence is capable of just not going there. And since all of us, systematically have been exposed to more and more stimulus, then we're all probably at risk for that. I mean, how many times have you been doing something and then ding happens and it's like Pavlov's dogs, you're like, yes? And so how can we expect kids who don't have full, frontal lobe development to not go there?
Yeah, Dr. Cottrell, what are your thoughts about the notifications and how that can impact the capacity of a kid to focus?
Well, most of the social media engines are really well developed to do one thing, and that's to give people dopamine hits, right? So they have 6 or 7 tricks that they use, right, to get you into this minor addictive pattern, right? And it can be wanting to see likes, and it can be a haptic, it can be all kinds of different things. So that kind of distraction is very real, right? I think educationally, that's what it is. So what we feel a responsibility to do is to educate kids about that so they understand that and are not as easily manipulated by that, right? I think some of the social media engines are a little worse. I would say TikTok in particular uses its algorithm, does try to get you addicted with dopamine hits, but it's also very comparative, right? That one generally has a message that you're never good enough, and it uses a lot of video, and video is much stickier than a lot of the other media that you see on social media. So, when people talk about concerns about TikTok, I agree with that. TikTok, I agree with that. That's more potentially has more issues for young people than some of the other social media.
And when you say stickier, what do you mean by that?
I mean, video has a bigger impact on teenagers than just an image would, right, or something like that. Yeah. Whereas a lot of the other social media sites are really principally image based.
Yeah. How much are you using social media? Not to turn it to you specifically, but you and your peers using social media throughout the day. And what do you think about some of what Dr. Cottrell has shared?
I think I use it more than I should, and I think it really does affect mental health, and it does affect like your self-image, and it can make people really insecure and self-conscious. And because of all the new technology and all the new editing apps, it can also give like a false image of what you want to be or what you expect people to be, and it can really hurt a person.
Yeah, Britt, what are your thoughts on that? I see you nodding over there.
Yeah, no, it's just social comparison. You know, it's something that we've done for eons because it was originally a way for us to improve ourselves. Like if I see you doing something that's kind of cool and it's going to move the species forward, not to get technical, but that's what I would do too. So social comparison is not going away. It's part of our DNA. And so I do agree, these social media outlets, they manipulate the human drive for comparison to try to sell you something or whatever it's doing. But in the meantime, the collateral damage is oftentimes your self-esteem. My 15-year-old son, he comes up, I need this supplement and this supplement. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, somebody showed me this on the video. And I was like, whoa, 15-year-old boys are worried about what they look like right now? I mean, maybe that's partly normal and developmentally appropriate, but also it's way out of hand, and it's coming from these videos of these kind of, you know, ripped guys. It's concerning. Very concerning.
You know, Principal Kuba, Dr. Cottrell talked about the cacophony outside of his office at lunchtime and breaks. Tell me about the before and after that you saw on your campus. I believe you said it was around 5 or 6 years ago that you decided no more cell phones. And what do you see the difference in the kids?
I think, as an example, last week or 2 weeks ago, it was rainy in Hawaii, so I couldn't have the kids going out on the field or anything. So one of the things we did was say, okay, stay on the sidewalks, but usually they don't have their laptops out. And this is not like a cell phone, but I did say, since you guys are sitting down, if you sit down, you can take out your laptops, play games, or do some of our educational games on the computer. Surprisingly, when I walked around, the majority of the kids were off. They didn't take out their laptops. They're still hanging out together on the sidewalk, talking, of course, making tons of noise, but, you know, enjoying each other. But that's the kind of reaction or their interactions that I want to see with the kids, and trying to take that screen away from them. And by doing that, you know, you get that opportunity for kids to hang out and, how do they say, talk story, you know. Yeah.
And just like, you know, the habit is to do this, like the bell rings, I go to my cell phone. I'm guessing that a lot of the students just have the habit, the bell rings or for lunch, and they go play something. Yeah. Like, we are creatures of habit, and you can habituate to anything. So your students perhaps have habituated to, this is what we do.
Yeah. How's that habituating going where you are? And I'm interested to know, it's early days still. I think the first quarter just finished. So are you seeing any academic improvement? Is there a difference there?
Well, we haven't really tracked it. We did have a little bit of an insight from our longtime teachers, right? And they had said over the years, I think as students use cell phones more and more and more during breaks, they were less well prepared when they came for extra help. So that's kind of one little data point that we'll follow up on. Does it seem like, you know, when students have an opportunity and now, you know, they're not using their cell phones as much, are they more well prepared?
There's a question here that says, how does the phone rules apply to the staff? I'm interested from both of you. Dr. Cottrell, what are the rules for the grown-ups on campus?
Well, it's self-imposed, right? But I think if you're a good teacher and you know what's going on, you know that modeling is such a huge part of education. I mean, the students are watching everything you do. So even for me, I have a hard time because I'm walking around all the time thinking I should take my phone out and look at it, but I'm trying to be much more disciplined walking around and keeping my phone in my pocket just for that reason.
Yeah, and Principal Kuba, what about you?
Well, similar. You know, it's funny when I go into classrooms and working with kids, I do have my alarm on my phone for every period. So when my alarm goes off, like you said, all the kids turn, they look over. But by now they know it's my phone. But I'm more cognizant of modeling, because when I do take out my phone, I actually verbalize out loud, oh, I need to use my calculator, or I'm looking up your word that you're learning about. So I tell the kids why I'm on my phone.
So that there's some intention behind it.
Yeah.
Aaliyah, how realistic does this sound? Can you imagine, I'm just interested to know if it's possible to be a student, you know, in 2024, you know, a sophomore and above, and not have a phone. Do any of your friends not have a cell phone?
I think all of my friends do, and I think everybody in my class has a phone, and I think a lot of the parents recommend them having a phone, because recently we actually had a threatened school shooter, and a lot of the kids were really threatened. And even I stayed home because I didn't want to risk anything. And even if I did go to school, my parents would tell me to bring my phone, have my notifications on, be aware, look around, whatever. And I just think it's safer and better if we do have our phone.
Yeah, well, definitely an emergency situation. But what about, you know, just day-to-day socially? Do you think it's possible to operate in the world and have a social life and not have a phone at your age?
I think it is possible. It just would be kind of complicated because you're surrounded by everybody having a phone, and especially because we don't have any policies about it. Everybody's on their phone, they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, and it would just be a little bit complicated to try and fit in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then that fitting in is, of course, what is so important at that age. There's a viewer question here. Dr. Kurtel, can you take this one? Are there more privacy concerns when it comes to cell phone on campus? Too often we see kids on social media being filmed without their knowledge. How do we make sure that, you know, there is that consent piece too for kids who might not want to be?
Yeah, that's been around for quite a while, right? And, you know, I think the larger issue is always, I mean, the generation we're talking about, you guys are digital natives, right? This is just the milieu you've grown up in, right? So a lot of it is educating kids on do's and don'ts and respecting other people and things like that. But it keeps, the playing field keeps changing. You know, I just got a policy alert from our independent school organization about something's going on the continent, and it's using AIs to create illicit images of students doing this to each other, and now there's a big rise of that, and it's a kind of, you know, horrific bullying that's going on. But then again, this is, you know, how do you disseminate something like that on social media, right? So, you know, it just keeps moving, right? And I think schools have the responsibility to keep educating students so that they're aware of it and empowered, right?
Yeah.
And have actually the awarenesses that we heard. Those are fantastic.
Yeah, Britt, this can feel really overwhelming. I wonder for the parents who are watching, you know, how do you suggest navigating this?
Well, first, I just want to say that was a really great insight about what's coming our way and the tsunami of like AI and what that's going to look like. And my brain just couldn't help go to, we need resilient kids out there. Like, if this is what's coming down and there's kind of this stuff that could happen, and I'm thinking, okay, how do we create resilient kids? Part of it is deepening connections and building some of that armor and self-esteem. So it just kind of is this full circle moment, like the more connection we can build with other humans, the higher self-esteem and resilience we have, we can maybe, you know, navigate some of these really scary things that are coming down the pipe. But sorry, what was the question? That was my exercise.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. You know, I mean, how do you tell parents how to navigate this? At what age do you think it is appropriate for a child to have a smartphone?
You know, I liked how it was maybe 4 to 6 years ago. I believe there was a big push for 8th grade. And even though, no, your brain is not fully developed in 8th grade, you have kind of navigated the early parts of middle school and you're about to navigate high school. That always felt like a better time than like certainly third, fourth, fifth grade that's happening now. And so, like, you know, 5 years old to 12 years old, it's this developmental explosion around, like, is the world trustworthy? What does it mean to be part of this world? You know, all of this stuff. So we think by 8th, 9th grade, you've got a good grip on some of that. So maybe that's the good time to introduce a cell phone. But I am a big fan of Aristotle and the concept of moderation at all times. And as a country, we tend to overcorrect and then we undercorrect and we just keep swinging back and forth. And so even some Gen Z, you know, people are feel like they've gone too far and they're pulling back. Like eventually we're going to settle in the middle, but while we're learning how to settle as a country, that's kind of the precarious time because we're dragging the kids with us as we went, whoa, you can have anything you want, and then no, you can't have anything. There is definitely a middle ground here. I think we're maybe years away from finding it though, frankly.
Principal Kuba, do most students that that are on your campus, do they tend to have a phone that they bring with them, or does a policy like yours kind of discourage that adoption and maybe delay it a little bit?
Most of our students do have phones. They definitely, I know they borrow each other's phones too. But given our clientele of students there, some of them, there's a small portion that don't have, but most of them do.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts about when it's appropriate for them to have one? I mean, I know that's probably family by family, but generally, given your experience with kids for so long.
I was going to say, are you asking me as a dad or a principal? But sometimes I have those conversations with families, and I for certain ones, I suggest to them that they take the phone away. Others, I do remind them that there's also flip phones that you can buy for your child and still keep in touch with them. But those are families that have had multiple issues with social media, with content that they're sending to others that are inappropriate. More dire solutions need to be had with the family. So I have had those conversations.
There's a question from Eric in Kailua. Dr. Gurchel is saying, cell phones are essentially pocket computers which can be used as a learning tool. Is there any thought to the idea of utilizing the tool at hand for lessons in the classroom? I mean, this goes to what Alea was saying about how she's using cell phones every day in her classrooms. So to what degree do you integrate that? Because it is such a powerful device for good as well. Yeah, I mean, again, smartphones have tons of positives, right? And so there are good educational apps. Duolingo is a really good one. So we have some language teachers who would use Duolingo in their class. I think there's also different devices that are used in education, right? So yes, I have ChatGPT on my phone, and I use it that way on my phone. But most of the time, I'm either using a computer or an iPad. So, there's typically a different device, right? You often either have something like an iPad or a laptop or something like that for students to use as well. They're just the limitations of the size of the screen and the ability also to, use the interface to type things in. So there's some limitations just to the technology itself. And what about the idea that if we delay this too long, then the students don't, that this needs to be part of their learning as well? I'm just interested in that. I agree with Britt that, the risks, the mental health risks probably track developmentally. And so the kind of thing I said before about TikTok being a very comparative algorithm, during adolescence, like when you're going through puberty, that's a really hard time to have something like that talking to you, right? So I think 8th grade or 9th grade is a good time to say that's probably a better time for students to get phones. But that said, it isn't just about when you give your kid a phone. This is ubiquitous in our families, right? It's not like you're going home and your parents aren't using phones in front of you all the time, so it's become almost like shoes, right? Everybody's got them and everybody's using or wearing them all the time and using them all the time, right? So the idea of it kind of lives alone in isolation, just in this idea of when you should give your child a phone, is linked to how your family interfaces with that as well. Alea, when did you get a phone, and do you feel like it was the right time, too early, too late? How do you fall on that?
I got my first phone when I was in 6th grade, and I think it was a good time because in 6th grade I was in school by myself for the first time in forever, and I felt really scared because I was so used to going home with my siblings every day, meeting up every day, and I was really on my own. And even at the time where I was like about to hit puberty and I was about to feel all those emotions and different things, I really didn't find myself going on it a lot. And I think it also has to do with the time I was in 6th grade, and not a lot of kids in my class had a phone, so I think that really helped because I wasn't influenced to be like, oh, I need to check this, I need to check that. I feel like I just used it for emergencies. To text your family. And what about now? How have those habits sort of formed over time? I think it really helped me because I found myself not really caring about what other people think until I reached high school, which I think I would have been the same if I had gotten a phone my freshman year.
There's a question actually that's just come for you, so I'll stay with you for a second. What do your siblings think about you having a phone? Do they worry about you often? Do you think it's important to have your phone to stay connected?
My siblings did kind of worry about me in the pandemic because I'm the middle child and I was really shy and I didn't have a lot of friends, and I relied on my phone a lot to communicate with other people, and they were worried I would communicate with the wrong kind of people because I was still young and I barely knew my right from my wrong. But I think as I grew up, they learned to trust me more, and especially with the different apps and stuff, they can track what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, and if I'm being safe on the internet or not.
Mm-hmm. This one is for Dr. Cottrell. I have a feeling this is an Iolani parent, but I'm not sure. It says, if the no cell phone policy is going well, will Iolani include the 10th to 12th graders in the cell phone ban?
So we're having a conversation this year with the 10th through 12th graders. You know, again, developmentally, they're a little older, right? And there is the principle of wanting students to take responsibility for things. So something's going to happen. But it's in part going to be driven by what the 10th through 12th graders observe and what they want to do. I think in general, they're probably seeing the 7th through 9th graders having a lot of fun and connecting with each other. So I think it will end up being something where there is a kind of ban, but probably not, I'm going to guess probably not the whole day.
But you are expecting more restrictions.
Yeah. But I think they'll get there.
This is student driven.
Yeah.
That's interesting. There's another parent writing in, Principal Kuba. What role do you think schools play in educating not only students but parents as well about the psychological impact of smartphones on children under 12 years? Are these conversations that you're having with the parents in your community?
I try to, but if anything, I'd send out emails, but we haven't had that specific kind of parent community meeting. It's just a lot of the parents who are coming in, we let them know that when you come to Jarrett, this is our cell phone policy. Haven't had any pushback. In fact, some parents are grateful. I think a lot of parents are grateful. And even I've had, students who had their phone taken away, and then the parents asked me if I can hold it over the weekend. Of course, the student doesn't like that, but I say sure, and we can do that. And the student will come on Monday, and I talk to them and ask them how their weekend was, and they didn't die, so that's a good thing. And they said, oh no, it was good. They handled it.
But actually he's alluding to the mental health of parents too, which is something that I don't know if we've talked about. Having raised 3 kids in the age of smartphones, the actual cognitive relief I feel from going, you know what, from 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., Dawson does not have access to TikTok and all of these things. There's something calming and peaceful about that as I'm at my job. And I just know there's been 7 hours of a phone-free day. That feels awesome, I just have to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Principal Kuba, do you think it would be, and I know that you don't get to choose, you're not setting DOE policy, but what are your thoughts about other states who have banned this on public schools or put severe restrictions in public schools? Would that be useful, do you think, in Hawaii?
For us, if I go off of what's been happening in our school, I think it's been a good thing. And when I said full ban too, I think the educational aspect of the phone was also, there was a question about that. If my teachers wanted to use it in the classroom, that's one of our caveats where it would be okay. To use it for educational purposes. I've used it with students who don't understand English. I tell them take out their phones and then we converse with each other and I get the translation. So, there's a lot of good to the cell phone as a tool. It can be good and bad. So I allow my teachers to do that.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Cottrell, I know that public schools and private schools operate differently in this space, and the private schools get to set their own policy. But do you think that it would be helpful if the state had a policy that regulated all schools that then would probably, mirror something like what Iolani is doing?
I don't know. I think the way the state is doing it is leaving it up to their principals. I think most independent schools are having some kind of a ban, right? I know that in California, where California all the public schools had to adopt a ban, that almost all of the independent schools did exactly the same thing. So I imagine it would be very, very similar if.
Yeah, and there is something about strength in numbers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Britt, I'm curious to know what you think that then does to the conversation at home. Mommy, can I get a phone? Like, when can I get a phone?
Right.
If your school is saying
Right.
you can't use it during the day, that might help to delay that a little bit.
I mean, we parents love, something that takes a little bit of the heat off us. I mean, right? Sometimes it is nice to say, well, this is the culture of the school you go to, or, if we do institute a statewide ban, this is what we do in Hawaii. And that's sort of the main gist of what I'm trying to get at, is like, this is what we do, is something that the schools are absolutely allowed to dictate. At Iolani, this is how we, this is how we behave. These are the types of choices we made. To be an Iolani student, this is who you are in the world to some degree. Maybe at Jared as well. So adolescence is like trying on a different hat like every week and seeing which one fits. And they need some boundaries and borders around like expectations and who am I expected to be. And I love the idea of like, we trust you to make the right decision. Even that is saying, at this school, we trust you to use your brain and to make good decisions. And that is empowering for a child, too. When it comes to passing the buck a little bit, I will say we put parental apps on our phones from, I think 8th grade to 9th or 10th grade. And it was really, really great. One tool to encourage moderation is to have something like Custodio or something on a phone that says, at 2 hours of whatever, it just kind of shuts off. And yes, your kid can get mad at you, but honestly, they're sort of mad at the app. And so it's a nice way to join forces with the parental app. It doesn't have to be the wild, wild west, even at home. There are tools out there you can use. And again, also, who are we as a family? Do we interact? Are we, social creatures in our house? Or do we all go to our separate rooms and stay on our phones? Like, what culture are you setting up at home? What culture are you setting up at the schools?
Right, and Dr. Crittrell, are parents punting a little bit too much for schools on this, to say, yes, not for you, but yes for me?
Well, so we do talk to our parents about this, right? And there's, schools do a certain amount in the development and education and kind of growth of kids. Parents do a lot more, right? So parents are the vast majority of the influence on a child growing up. So we talk to parents about that. There's two good kind of terms. One's called technoference, where parents are using their phones too much in front of their children. There's a good study that shows if parents use their phones or on their phones more than 7 hours a day, so versus parents that are on their phone an hour, student self-reported depression goes from 7% to up to almost 40%, right? Wow. So you're sending the message to your child, you're not as important as my phone, right? The other one is called sharenting, where very proud parents are very proud of their children and at times in competition with other parents and, posting their children all the wonderful things they've done. And that can also feel like a kind of, inappropriate pressure on kids too. So generally, when I talk to parents, and we have assemblies about this with parents, or we call them coffee talks, we say, be aware of using your phone in front of your child and what message you're sending. And if you're going to post something about them, just ask. Just say, are you okay with me posting this? Yeah.
Seems fair. Alea, there's a question here. Do you think extracurricular activities such as sports and clubs help limit your usage of being on the phone? We did mention at the top your involvement in volleyball, very, very successful this year. But to what extent do you think extracurriculars help keep you off your phone?
I think because of volleyball, it took hours out of my day where I'm just working out, running, and it keeps me off my phone, but it also keeps my mind off of my phone, and it distracts me from whatever I'm thinking of, especially when I'm overthinking or I'm self-conscious. If I go to volleyball or if I have an extra class after school, it just helps take my mind off of everything.
Yeah, staying engaged. Britt, I would love for you to react to what Dr. Crittrell just said, that it's not just the students. We're so focused in this conversation and just in general on what the kids are doing, but what are we also doing as moms and dads?
He's right. I mean, parents are the ultimate influencers, the family system, right? And it goes back into who am I? If I'm observing a parent on the phone all the time, then the narrative in the head is, this is what grown-ups do. This is what moms do. it's all about like, how does an adult make their way in the world? And the way you make your way in the world is how your child will generally do so. And so they are watching you at all times. And the biggest human desire in the world is relevance. You know, do I matter? Am I important? And so if it's this and your child's trying to gain your attention, then you are messaging, signaling, without saying it, of course, in words, you know, hold on, this is priority, not you. And so I can see where the depression element comes in, because not once or twice, but we're talking about consistently over time, that this is the messaging you get. And your parents are the ultimate, you are important people. Like, they are those, you know, from birth onward. So if the messaging is you're second or third to this device, it can really hurt.
Right, even if you never actually would say that out loud.
You're never saying it. It is subconscious signaling at all times.
Wow. Yeah. Principal Kuba, what are your thoughts on that, about the parental behavior? You know, I'm sure you see parents walking on campus with a head in their phone as well.
Well, actually, I don't see that too often. I mean, our parents, you know, they're engaged with their students when they come onto our campus. But when you're speaking about that, of course, I feel guilty then.
Yeah, you do. I think we all do
checking
now.
my email, doing the school's Instagram, and you know, all this stuff. And luckily, my daughters are better than I am, so they're off their phones less than, you know, better than all the time I spend doing all my emails and whatnot. So, but I can see that now, how that can, it's through your actions that you communicate to your children their importance. And again, the cell phone or any device, right, or time is can communicate that, positive or negative. And as parents, we need to be careful about that.
Yeah.
And as a couples counselor, not to like plug that or anything, but you see this in marriages all the time, where it's, are you important? You know, am I important? Do I matter? If the answer is signaled no, that breaks up a lot of marriages and families. And not to like explode this into something huge, but this idea of like, do I matter? It's important for couples. It's important for dyads between a parent and a child. It's important for siblings. It's the most important premise we have as humans. And so these devices have just added one more thing that grabs our attention and perhaps signals unwittingly that the other things around us aren't important. If that makes sense.
There's a comment here from Melvin. You need a phone today for so many basic things, including passes to events, bus passes, etc. You know, I'm thinking about when you go to a restaurant now and you have to scan a QR code. Seems like those needs may potentially compete with school policies. You know, Dr. Gritchell, when I was in middle school, we had a landline at home, and I spent hours on that landline talking to my friends, much to the chagrin of my parents. You know, and I was talking about this with my husband and saying, should we install a landline so that our kids can talk to each other? But I guess kids don't really do that. But if you don't want to have this device in your home or in the child's life, but you're competing with what Melvin's talking about, that these are devices that are just out there and we need them, how do we balance that?
Yeah, I don't think the premise is you shouldn't have a phone, right? You know, the premise is we want students to be empowered to have a relationship with the phone that's healthy for them, right? So, you know, if not having the school at phone is not stopping anybody from doing all the things that were cited there, right? And of course, after school, you're going to have, you know, most kids have a phone, yeah, and they're going to have all the opportunities to do all of the things that we're talking about. Hopefully at school, there's some education to empower them to understand how they're being affected, what some, you know, maybe social media is doing to them, and then they get kind of good at it, right? I think there's, in some of the literature that's circulating, there's a mistake that poses cell phone or smartphone use for students like it's a kind of toxin, that the more they use it, the worse it is for them. There's a lot of research that doesn't show that's true at all, that it's much more like driving, that it's something that has risk. We all learn how to do it. We learn to have a relationship with driving that's fine. But on either end of that, it sort of looks like the letter U. On either end, maybe people who don't drive very much are at higher risk, and people who drive way, way more than other people are at higher risk. But in the middle, the vast majority of us learn how to use it, and we're fine with it, right? And I think that's the goal, right? You know, that phones, cell phones, or smartphones aren't going to go away. You know, social media is not going to go away. But as it's now been introduced and we understand it better, we need to learn to digest it and be empowered to use it in a way that it doesn't maybe predate on us.
Alea, do you feel like you're in a place of that balance that Dr. Krichala is talking about? I know personally I'm not. I feel like I spend way too much time on my phone, and I could use a little bit of digital detox. But where have you landed with that?
I think I also do use my phone a little too much, but then on the other hand, I feel like there's times where I'm using my phone in places where I feel like I shouldn't be, like you said, at restaurants where I have to scan a QR code instead of just reading off the menu. I think that's really unnecessary. And yeah, I feel like I just use it more than I should.
Yeah, I know. I like menus with pictures. But Britt, I mean, I like what Dr. Krichala is saying about that it's not an either-or proposition, because these are here to stay.
Yeah, and a lot of parents who give the phone to their child, like there's going to be a huge amount of hours spent on it. And then there's going to be a little bit of correction. Like you observe your child and see if they can make corrections and pivots in their use. Where there's, danger or scary stuff is when there aren't any corrections into moderation. Like you're saying, it's the top and it's the tops of the U curve. And so, for parents who notice their child isolating for many hours a day, or utilizing it for, sending an appropriate picture. Like there's so many ways it can be used in an unwise way, but if you just give it a minute, it's also possible that your child can correct back to the middle. Those particular behaviors are alarming, and you want to take notice and certainly address it. But if your child's just on it a lot because they just got their phone and it's the first 2 months, I don't know if that's a time exactly to panic. This is new, this is exciting. The idea is that they will calm down, they will moderate, and those who don't, there has to be some sort of addressing of that, maybe through a parental app or something else, but the vast majority will come through it. My daughters at 13, 14 got their phones. It was like, you would not believe how excited they were. Now they're at college, they're going to parties, they're socializing in their dorms, they have self-corrected quite a bit, and so I'm not as worried, but those first few months I was terrified.
Well, and then the other thing about this is that the consequences feel more permanent, right? When I was growing up, I didn't have a cell phone, right? Smartphones didn't exist at those ages, and so you may have misbehaved, but nobody documented it, and it certainly didn't live on the internet forever, right? So as a parent, that feels particularly worrying.
It does, and it's a little terrifying with the AI going on. I just listened to something about even this generation, I don't remember the number, I'm so sorry, but this generation that we've been sharenting a lot, we're putting out there where our kids went to school, what our family pets are, and everything. And so those are the exact questions that two-factor authentication asks, And so they're just gathering, people could absolutely gather tons of information from your Facebook post about your child over 10 years. And the worry is that scammers are going to start to use that, and then there's going to be a lot of stuff going on for our kids. So the idea of getting consent or pulling back, I did hear Europe has a law that there is a process you can go through to wipe yourself from the internet. And I wonder if we're going to have that here. But maybe our kids need it, because I'm thinking, oh my God, how many questions could a scammer answer about my child at this point, right?
Interesting. Principal Kuba, I'm thinking that at the end of the day, we're talking about, especially the children that you're dealing with and that you're helping to educate, these are young children, right? And so all of the things that we're talking about seem like a lot to take on.
Yeah, and so during the middle years, which is from 5th grade to 9th grade, that's their adolescent years, and their brains are developing, their bodies, everything, and just adding that social media aspect to the mix is really challenging to navigate. When there's situations, negative ones that happen, say over the weekend, it's not just an argument between you and I, but then everyone knows, that a lot of people in school. So it just magnifies a disagreement that could have been resolved by us two talking. But now you have 10 other people who know, those 10 are sharing it with another 20. So it's really difficult for, I think, anyone, but more so an adolescent to deal with. And that's part of the reason, we wanted to do our ban within the school. But mainly, the biggest one is allowing our kids to realize that there's life beyond a cell phone. and how kind of get back to how when I was going to school, playing those games that we just made up on the field, whether it's football, basketball, those kind of things, getting the kids again to interact and enjoy each other's company. But that was our main reason for shifting.
Yeah. Those opportunity costs that you were talking about and the importance of that. I wanted to bring in this question from Layla. Will the recent wave of states on the continent banning cell phones on campus, or at least their use on campus, have any effect on what we do here, trends or trends? Have other schools or leaders in education come to you now that Iolani has taken this stance, and do you think it will influence other institutions?
Yeah, I think it's not a trend now. It's kind of a general adoption path. And I think even if you don't completely agree with a causal relationship between mental health issues and smartphones and social media, the opportunity cost part is just irrefutable. And we've kind of done the experiment. We got smartphones, we lived with them for 10 years, we watched our kids stop doing a lot of things and sitting around and just looking at them during their free time. We went through a pandemic where that's pretty much all they had and watched their mental health decline. And now, we can pretty much watch, if we stop it, they're having fun together, right? And I do think it's not just fun. There's a whole host of developmental things that are happening in all of those interactions, right? So, the correct word is moderation, because, okay, we reclaim some of that time there, but then outside of school, they have freedom to do whatever they want, so maybe they'll use their cell phones more. But I do think the opportunity cost part of it is something that's widely recognized, right?
Yeah, and I want to key into something you said there, that it's not just fun, because we tend to think of, these students are talking to each other, they're socializing, they're playing cards, but there is something else happening as well.
Well, I think what's happening is developmentally, they're more wired into the kind of connections that we're supposed to be making, in the way that who we are as human beings, so that gets better and better as they get older, right? If you miss those things, I would use the example of, during the pandemic, we all had masks on, and there was quite a bit of research that showed for little kids, they missed the opportunity to make connections to facial expressions, right? Well, if you're always on your phone, you're missing the opportunity to make some connections to how people act when they're actually talking to each other. So,
Alea, do you feel like these would be welcome restrictions on your campus? Do you think that this is something that schools should consider, as a student yourself?
I think it should be considered, but I also think it would be very hard because of the 3,000 plus kids at my school and probably more incoming. I think it would be really hard because it's just too much to manage.
And what do you think about when we're talking about these opportunity costs, this connection? Are you able to do that? I mean, I know that this is also just an experiment of one, right? Your own personal experience, but do you feel like anything is lost by having a phone in your experience?
I think me personally, I'm still having connections that I would have if I didn't have a phone. I think that also comes in with me being in a lot of extracurricular stuff. I'm meeting new people without having to be on my phone, and it just helps.
Principal Kubo, what would you say to other principals or educators who may be watching tonight about why this might be something worth considering?
Well, I just think that every school is different, so I kind of like that principals have that freedom to work with their faculty and their families to come up with what's best for their school. But for us, I think it's really helped the kids to, again, interact. In the morning, when I come into our library, I see kids, we bought games for them, like Chinese jump rope or Rubik's Cubes and all these games, and Connect Four. They're playing those games again and talking to each other, problem solving, just interacting with each other in positive ways that, again, you're not seeing that facial expression or that fun together if you're communicating over the phone or everybody's sitting next to each other, and it's kind of like preschool and parallel play, but it's actually getting together and interacting.
Britt, Christmas is coming, Black Friday is around the corner. A lot of people are thinking about getting a phone for their student. What do you say?
Well, if I had to have any guidance at all, it would be to observe your child. And if you feel like they are age appropriate, and again, I'm not going to say 8th, 9th grade is the absolute time, but if you feel like they are post some of this more elementary development, of course it's fine. But the first thing I would do, and I really mean this, I would, at that age, even 12, 13, 14, I think a parental app would just go on the phone and that would be the condition, so that there's these shutoffs and they learn what 2 hours feels like versus 5, 6 hours, and they know that that's adequate time. So of course, get the devices if you feel like that's the parenting choice you want to make. But I would definitely think about it and think about some guardrails around it. And at this age, 12, 13, 14, sometimes you have to promote moderation and show them what that is. And then when they're a little older, they know what that is and they can moderate themselves. But if your child is in the space where they can moderate themselves, you probably don't need much of that. If they're not, my kids were really late bloomers. Like, we needed those guardrails for a while. And so when I felt like we could take the training wheels off, we would, and I would test it out. And then they would go crazy and I go, nope, the training wheel's going back on. And we would do this for 6 to 8 months until I finally realized they're ready.
Okay.
Just use your best judgment.
And there's a difference between a phone and social media.
There is, and a lot of these parental apps do limit social media. You can choose which ones they even have access to. Or you can limit TikTok to 30 minutes if you want to. Some of the more sophisticated ones allow you some agency over that. I kind of like that about it. Yeah. Well,
I think
frankly.
I'm going to need that too.
Yeah.
My kids are still little, but
Yeah.
I'm taking it all in.
Yeah.
Mahalo to you for joining us tonight. Of course, we do thank our guests, therapist Britt Young and Principal Reed Kuba, and Head of School at Iolani, Dr. Timothy Cottrell, and Campbell High School sophomore Alea Tuitele. Please join us in January of 2025 when we return with new episodes. 2024 does mark the 15th year of Insights here on PBS Hawaii. We do appreciate all of our viewers at home for your continued support and participation in our program. I'm Yanji Denise for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Until next time, aloha.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaii are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo, and by Carl Smith Ball, providing legal services throughout Hawaii and the Pacific since 1857, making a positive difference in the communities where we